What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved stars, known for her grace, charm, and unshakable composure, suddenly meets her breaking point on live television? When Sandra Bullock sat down on The View, no one could have predicted that within minutes, the air would turn electric, and that the world would watch a side of her they'd never seen before. It began like any other episode. The audience cheered as the co-hosts introduced the Oscar-winning actress, there to promote her new film, a heartfelt drama about redemption and second chances. Sandra smiled that signature smile, gracious and warm, waving to the crowd as she took her seat. Whoopi leaned forward, teasing, "Sandra, you've done action, you've done romance, you've done comedy. Now this role's different. It's heavy." Sandra nodded softly. "Yeah, this one took a lot out of me. It's about finding hope again after losing everything. It's personal." There was a brief, respectful hush. But before Sandra could continue, Sonny Hostin's voice cut through, calm but edged. "Sandra, I have to ask, you've played characters with incredible resilience. But lately, some critics say Hollywood's been giving actresses like you, established, successful women, roles that are more about guilt than growth. Do you agree?" The air shifted. The audience leaned in. Sandra's smile flickered. "I think people read into things too much sometimes. It's a story, a human story." Sonny pressed, her tone sharpening just enough to draw blood. "But don't you think, with your platform, that you have a responsibility to push for better representation of women's struggles, not just their pain?" Whoopi glanced toward Joy Behar, sensing tension. Joy shifted in her chair, eyebrows raised. Sandra inhaled slowly, keeping her composure. "Sonny, I think you're missing the point of the film. It's not about glorifying suffering, it's about surviving it." Sonny didn't back down. "I understand that, but—" "No," Sandra interrupted, her voice cutting like glass for the first time that morning. "I don't think you do." The audience gasped. The studio's sound techs looked up. Even Whoopi froze for a second, her mouth half open. Sandra leaned slightly forward, her tone steady but unmistakably cold. "You asked me here to talk about a movie that means something deeply personal to me. But if we're going to turn it into a debate about what kind of women I should play, then maybe we're missing the heart of the story." Sonny's jaw tightened. The cameras zoomed in, two women, two powerhouses, staring each other down under the heat of the lights. The silence stretched thick enough to feel. Then, as if trying to diffuse it, Joy chuckled awkwardly. "Well, I guess we're skipping the weather report today." The audience laughed, nervously, uncertainly, as Whoopi lifted a hand. "All right," she said, trying to bring balance. "Let's keep it civil, ladies." Sandra's eyes softened, but her pulse was visible at her temple. "I'm civil," she murmured. "I just think it's unfair to reduce someone's work to a political statement every time." Sonny leaned back, crossing her arms. "And I think sometimes art is political, whether we admit it or not." The tension was back, tighter now, sharper. Sandra blinked, her calm starting to crack around the edges. "Then maybe," she said quietly. "That's the problem." The words hung there. The audience didn't know if they should clap or stay silent. One thing was clear. This wasn't going to be just another interview. Off camera, producers whispered into headsets, trying to decide whether to cut to commercial. But before they could, Sonny leaned forward again, her voice dipping lower, deliberate. "You've said before, in other interviews, that you don't like talking about politics. But don't you think silence, especially from someone in your position, can also be a statement?" Sandra froze. That was the moment. The spark that turned into a flame. Her expression shifted. Something inside her snapped into focus. "You're right," she said, voice trembling slightly. "Silence is a statement, but so is choosing peace over performance." The studio fell utterly still. Then someone in the back clapped. 1, 2, 3 slow claps, before the rest of the audience joined, half supportive, half stunned. Sonny smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed locked on Sandra. "Powerful words," she said. Sandra didn't smile back. As they went to break, cameras still rolling, Sandra turned slightly away, her hands clenched under the table, the mask of grace barely holding. This was only the beginning, because when the cameras came back, what happened next would leave even The View's most seasoned viewers in shock. When the show returned from commercial, the atmosphere was deceptively calm. But beneath that glossy studio lighting, tension coiled like a live wire. Whoopi Goldberg tried to steer things back to neutral ground. "So," she said lightly, adjusting her cue cards, "Sandra, tell us about working with your co-star. I heard there was some real on-set magic happening." Sandra smiled politely, but the warmth was gone from her eyes. Her body language was guarded now. One leg crossed tightly over the other, hands clasped, knuckles faintly white. "It was a beautiful experience," she replied softly. "We built a lot of trust on set. It was one of those projects that changes you a little." But Sunny Hostin wasn't done. She leaned forward again, resting her elbows on the table, that same poised but piercing tone returning. "Sandra, I think that's wonderful. But can I ask, do you ever feel like Hollywood gives you the space to tell your truth? Or is it just giving you stories that feel safe?" Whoopi's head snapped slightly, eyes narrowing. Joy muttered under her breath, "Oh boy, here we go again." Sandra exhaled, forcing a calm smile. "What do you mean by safe?" Sunny shrugged. "I mean roles that don't challenge the system. You've built a career on likability, and it's worked. But in times like these, don't you think being liked isn't enough?" The audience murmured, small ripples of gasps and shifting seats. Sandra blinked slowly. That one landed. Her voice trembled, just enough to make the camera pick up the crack. "You know, Sunny, I don't wake up thinking about being liked. I wake up thinking about how to make people feel. That's what storytelling is to me." Sunny tilted her head. "But stories shape opinions. Don't you think your influence comes with a certain responsibility?" Sandra finished sharply. "I've heard that word so many times today." The live audience fell quiet again. You could almost hear the hum of the studio lights. Sandra continued, her tone rising, still measured, but heavy with restrained emotion. "It's funny. When men sit here, you ask them about their work, their process, their craft. When women sit here, we get asked about our duty." There it was, the first true strike. The crowd reacted, some clapping, others murmuring approval. Sunny blinked, caught for a moment between defense and understanding. "I'm not trying to attack you, Sandra," she said gently, almost too softly now. "I'm trying to understand what drives someone like you, someone who has everything, to still play broken women." Sandra's laugh was short, sharp, and almost disbelieving. "Because broken women are real, Sunny. And sometimes they're the strongest people in the room." The audience erupted in applause, the kind of spontaneous roar that rattles cameras and makes producers in the control room throw up their hands. Sunny smiled tightly, waiting for the cheers to die down. "I respect that. I just wonder if we should start showing women who don't need to be broken to be strong." The tension snapped back into place. Sandra's eyes glistened, just barely. Not tears. Not yet. But something raw, something trembling on the edge of exhaustion and fury. "Maybe I tell those stories because I've been those women," she said quietly. "You think I don't know what it feels like to fall apart and rebuild yourself piece by piece? To carry people's opinions about what you should or shouldn't be?" For a split second, no one moved. Even Whoopi looked genuinely taken aback. Sunny's voice lowered. "Then maybe that's the story you should tell, not through your characters, but through you." Sandra turned toward her fully now. The calm exterior slipped. Her words came slow, deliberate. "I tell it the only way I know how, by showing people they're not alone." That line, simple, pure, human, hit the audience like a wave. Applause thundered. Cameras zoomed in on Sandra's face, framed by studio lights, emotion etched into every line. But Sunny's expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew more analytical, more composed. "That's powerful," she said. "But don't you think?" Whoopi suddenly cut in. "Sunny." The tone was firm, authoritative. "Let's move on before I gotta throw holy water on both of y'all." Laughter rippled through the audience, easing the strain, but only for a moment. Sandra leaned back in her chair, forcing another faint smile, but her hands still trembled in her lap. Sunny adjusted her mic, pretending to read the next question from her notes, though everyone could tell she wasn't ready to let it go. "So," she continued with an almost performative brightness, "in your film, your character chooses forgiveness over revenge. Do you believe that's realistic?" Sandra raised an eyebrow, voice quiet but cutting. "Do you?" The room froze. Sunny hesitated, caught off guard. "I think forgiveness is complicated." Sandra nodded slowly. "Yeah, especially when you're being judged for what people think you should say instead of what you feel." The silence that followed was deafening, that charged kind of quiet where everyone knows they're witnessing something real. Joy Behar whispered, half joking, half serious, "Someone get me popcorn." The crowd laughed nervously again, grateful for the break in tension, but the damage was done. Sandra Bullock, America's sweetheart, had dropped her walls on live TV. And Sunny Hostin, calm and unflinching, had pushed her there. As the second commercial break approached, Whoopi muttered under her breath, "We're about to trend again, I can feel it. She wasn't wrong. Because when the cameras cut this time, Sandra wasn't smiling anymore. And Sunny, she was ready to go even deeper. The next segment would turn personal, too personal, and what came out on air would make headlines around the world. When the cameras faded back in for the third segment, the audience was already buzzing. They could feel it. Something real had cracked open in the last exchange, and nobody knew if it could be put back together. The usual morning show sparkle was gone. Now, it felt like standing on the edge of a storm. Sandra Bullock sat poised but visibly tense, her shoulders drawn in. Sunny Hostin, meanwhile, looked calm, almost too calm. Her voice that perfect blend of professional and probing. Whoopi tried to smooth it over with a joke. Okay, we're back, folks. Before someone throws a chair, let's talk about something a little lighter, yeah? The audience laughed, but Sandra didn't. She smiled politely, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sunny glanced at her cards, then at Sandra. Sandra, she began carefully, you've been one of Hollywood's most admired actresses for decades. You've stayed out of scandals, kept your private life private. But a lot of people have wondered, does that come with a cost? Sandra looked at her. The silence before she spoke felt endless. A cost? She repeated softly. Sunny nodded. Yes. You've spoken before about loss, about disappearing from the spotlight after your divorce, after your mother passed. Some might say you use acting to hide from real pain. Is that fair? The room went dead quiet. Joy Behar muttered, "Oh, damn," under her breath, and the audience gave a collective oof. Sandra blinked, once, twice, as if trying to decide whether to answer at all. Her voice came low, steady, but filled with something deeper. You know, Sunny, I came here to talk about my work. But you're asking me about my life, and that's not the same thing. Sunny nodded, leaning in slightly. But isn't it? Don't our stories come from who we are? Sandra's tone sharpened. Sometimes they do. But sometimes they come from who we used to be, or who we're trying not to be anymore. The audience applauded softly, but Sunny didn't back down. She pressed again. But don't you think people connect more when you show them your truth, not just your performances? Sandra exhaled, her patience thinning. My truth is in every frame of every film I've made. You just have to look for it. Whoopi shifted uncomfortably, trying to interject. All right, I think. But Sandra wasn't done. The emotion in her voice was breaking through now. Pain, anger, and something heartbreakingly honest. I've been through hell, Sunny. Losing people I love, being torn apart by tabloids, watching the world make judgments about things they know nothing about. And I've survived, not because I talk about it, but because I keep going. The audience broke into applause, genuine, emotional applause. Sunny let it pass, then spoke quietly. That's powerful. But don't you think your silence sometimes makes it easier for people to fill in the blanks? Sandra's eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a whisper that carried through the studio. Maybe. But I'd rather let people guess than let them own my story. A hush fell. You could hear someone in the crowd whisper, Wow. Whoopi sighed, rubbing her forehead. Lord have mercy. I told y'all we needed a therapist on this show. The audience laughed weakly, grateful for the tension break, but Sunny wasn't done, not yet. She looked directly at Sandra, tone lowering into something more personal. Sandra, you've said before that you try to protect your children from fame, from the chaos that comes with being you. But don't you think that same instinct to protect yourself might be holding you back from being fully honest with your audience? Sandra froze, the kind of stillness that only comes when something cuts too close. The studio was silent. Even the cameraman hesitated to zoom in. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. You don't know what it's like to hold a child who's been through trauma, to promise them safety, and then have people dig into your life like it's a buffet. You don't get to tell me what honesty looks like, Sunny. The words hit like a thunderclap. Sunny blinked, momentarily speechless. The audience gasped audibly, a collective intake of breath. Whoopi's eyes widened. Okay, we're getting real now, she muttered, motioning for the crew to stand by for a cut. But Sandra wasn't finished. She leaned forward, voice cracking with emotion. You can sit here and question my choices, my silence, my career. But don't question my heart. Don't question my motherhood. Applause erupted again, louder, wilder this time. The audience stood. It wasn't a cheer, it was support, raw human sympathy. Sunny swallowed, trying to recover. Sandra, I didn't mean to. I know you didn't, Sandra interrupted, her tone suddenly calm again, but icy beneath the surface. You wanted a headline. Congratulations, you got one. The crowd roared. Whoopi turned in her seat, waving her hand. All right, that's enough. We're going to break before I have to referee a boxing match. But Sandra wasn't laughing. She sat back, arms crossed tightly, her jaw clenched. Sunny stared down at her notes, the first trace of discomfort crossing her face. The theme music faded in, that cheerful, upbeat tune that suddenly felt completely wrong for the moment. As they went to commercial, Sandra stood up first, pulling off her mic. The cameras caught her lips moving, barely audible, as she leaned towards Sunny and said something only the nearby crew could hear. Sunny's expression changed. Shock, maybe regret. And then, Sandra walked off the stage. The studio fell into chaos. Producers scrambled. Audience members whispered. Whoopi muttered, "Well, that just happened." When they returned from the break, Sandra Bullock's chair was empty. Sunny Hostin sat perfectly still, eyes downcast, as Joy tried to fill the silence with a strained laugh. "I guess we'll be talking about this tomorrow." Whoopi shook her head, exhaling deeply. "And the internet's going to talk about it tonight." She was right, because within minutes, social media was exploding. Hashtags, clips, speculation. What did Sandra say? Why did she walk off? The world had just witnessed something raw, unfiltered, and painfully real. And the fallout was only beginning. When the cameras went dark after Sandra's sudden walk-off, the studio air didn't settle. It crackled. The audience sat frozen, whispering in disbelief, while the crew scrambled to recompose the show. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, as if the weight of what had happened finally sank in, murmurs began rippling through the rows of spectators. "Did she really just leave?" someone whispered. "She walked out." She actually walked out. Backstage, producers were moving quickly, headsets buzzing, assistants darting around trying to reach Sandra's team. But Sandra wasn't waiting. She had already left the stage area, her mic discarded on the table, her heels clicking sharply against the studio floor as she made her way toward the exit. In the control booth, one of the producers whispered, "We can't air that whole segment. We need to cut before the walk-off." But another voice replied, "It's already out there." The audience was recording. And that's how it began. By the time The View went off the air that morning, clips of Sandra's confrontation with Sunny Hostin were already flooding social media. Shaky audience footage, snippets of dialogue, out-of-context quotes. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, every platform was on fire. Hashtag Sandra Bullock walks off was trending within the hour. Half the internet was praising her for standing up for herself, for refusing to let her personal pain become tabloid entertainment. The other half accused her of being too sensitive or unable to handle tough questions. The line between empathy and criticism blurred, as it always does online. Meanwhile, The View released a short statement. Today's discussion became more personal than intended. We respect all our guests and appreciate Sandra's openness and honesty. But it didn't stop the headlines. Sandra Bullock storms off live show after tense exchange with Sunny Hostin. Sunny crosses the line? Hollywood's sweetheart finally snaps. Every news outlet had its version of the story, some sympathetic, others ruthless. Inside sources said Sandra's publicist was fielding calls nonstop, urging her not to issue an immediate statement. But late that evening, Sandra posted a short message on her official account. No photos, no filters, just words. "I went on The View to talk about my film, about healing and hope. What happened was emotional but real. I stand by what I said. We all have stories we protect. Some pain isn't meant for performance." That post alone drew millions of reactions. Celebrities chimed in, actors, directors, even co-stars. Viola Davis wrote, "Grace under fire." Always. Reese Witherspoon reposted it with a heart emoji. But Sunny Hostin wasn't silent either. The next day on The View, she addressed it head-on. Her tone was composed, but her eyes carried the weight of a restless night. "I want to say this clearly," she began. "Sandra Bullock is a woman I deeply respect. Our conversation yesterday got more personal than I intended. But I believe honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, matters. I hope she knows my questions came from that place." The audience gave a polite round of applause, but the online conversation didn't stop. In fact, it deepened. Fans debated who was right, who crossed the line, who owed who an apology. Clips of Sandra's trembling voice, "Don't question my motherhood," became the soundbite replayed on every talk show and reaction video for days. And yet, amid all the noise, something undeniable emerged: authenticity. People began sharing their own stories in the comments, in tweets, in long, heartfelt posts, about privacy, about judgment, about the way women in the spotlight are pushed until they break. Sandra had, unintentionally, opened a door into a conversation much larger than herself. 1 week later, Sandra returned to the public eye. Not through a talk show or a press event, but at the premiere of her film. The crowd roared when she appeared. She smiled, genuinely this time, waving to fans, not reporters. When asked by a journalist about the view, she simply said, "Sometimes the truth hurts. But it's still the truth." Sunny Hostin, for her part, later mentioned in an interview, "Sandra's strength is what made that moment powerful. I never meant to hurt her. But maybe, just maybe, it helped people see her differently, more human." In the end, no apologies were issued, and none were needed. Both women stood their ground. Both were changed. The world had witnessed not a scandal, but a spark, a collision of truth and vulnerability under the blinding lights of daytime TV. And in that collision, something real happened. Something unforgettable. Because sometimes the most shocking thing isn't anger or conflict, it's honesty. Sandra Bullock walked off that stage, but she didn't walk away from her truth. She reclaimed it. And the world, watching, couldn't look away. So now it's your turn. What do you think? Did Sunny go too far? Or was Sandra right to draw the line? Share your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to Prime Narrator for more explosive and cinematic moments that pull back the curtain on Hollywood's most powerful encounters. More stories like this are coming, and you won't want to miss the next one.